Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Address, and I greatly appreciate you being with us. These podcasts, as you know, are designed to help explore issues that touch us, our families, and our congregations in light of the revolution in longevity. We appreciate you being with us. You can follow us on our website, jewishsacredaging.com. Like us on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. And we have a very, very special program for you today. And I'd like to welcome a three-part panel to us with today's edition of Seekers of Meaning. First of all, we want to welcome a friend, Steve Lubetkin, who's the managing partner of Lubetkin Media Companies, our producer, and also the technical advisor and producer of High Holidays at his synagogue, Temple Emanuel in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'd like to welcome also Rabbi Adena Blum, the Rabbi of Beth Chaim in Princeton Junction, West Windsor, New Jersey. I hope that's okay, Adena. And Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, who's the Rabbi of Temple Israel in West Palm Beach. Welcome, all of you. I hope all of you are well. And the focus of this conversation is really, actually, to be honest, is a conversation that has grown out of some previous conversations that I've had with Jeff and some other colleagues and Steve. And that is the impact of what we're going through, worship and education-wise, in our congregations, having gone through the High Holidays, and really what this means to us and the future of our congregations and the Jewish community. Both of you are rabbis of not the large mega congregations, the central synagogues, the Valley Beth Shaloms, the congregations who have certain economic and other, let's say, resources that are not available to most congregations in the United States of America, regardless of the denomination. So first of all, let me welcome you and thank you guys for being with us. Let me just go around. Adena, did you, and this is the beginning, did you guys pre-record? Did you live stream? Did you Zoom? Was it a hybrid? How did you handle it, Beth Chaim?
It actually took us a long time to finally settle on a decision to pre-record just about everything for the High Holy Days, at least the worship services. We hired a videographer and spent the few weeks leading up to the High Holy Days recording everything from the sanctuary, including honors that the congregants held, the Torah services, all the liturgy, and all of the sermons. And those were edited by our videographer into one chunk so that we could open and close live by Zoom. And we live streamed everything from Zoom to YouTube. But we were actually playing the footage from a different place on YouTube and then channeling it through the Zoom so that people could also chat in the chat box.
And Jeff, how did you do this at West Palm Beach?
We did a hybrid, Richard. We did several services live, but we pre-recorded other services. I had made a decision that no one would be able to sit in front of a screen for the usual length of time that any of the services would be in real life, and so I chopped them apart. And so we isolated the Torah service, which we pre-recorded. I gave the Unatana Tokef, Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die, a room of its own. We pre-recorded that. We pre-recorded the shofar service. We pre-recorded much of the material for Yom Kippur. And we kept what I believe to be the holiest stuff as things that people could experience live. And it worked very well that way. But I will say this, that the pre-recorded stuff was the most stressful because we were working off of PowerPoint. We had to coordinate every single slide with the videos. And I said to a friend of mine, Adena, maybe you can relate to this. I said, I'm not a rabbi anymore. I'm a television producer.
Right. So let me talk to a producer. Steve, you did the entire, you pre-recorded most of the things for Temple Emanuel, correct?
Yeah, we did. We decided to go with a fully pre-recorded program. It was a bit of a challenge for us. to do that because we really didn't have the infrastructure in place. And on top of which, we were social distancing our clergy so that our cantor and music accompanist, music director, couldn't be in the sanctuary at the same time as the rabbi. So it was complicated in that we had to record the rabbi's part separately from them. And there are portions of the service where they intersperse, where the cantor will chant a line of the Unatana Tokef in Hebrew, and the rabbi will read it in English. And they go back and forth as a sort of a counterpoint, and it was challenging to edit that together in the end.
So, I mean, I took care of, I did High Holidays with this congregation in Jacksonville, and we were mostly live streamed from the Bema, just the cantor and I, separated by about 1.5 miles, and the tech company, and she and the cantor pre-recorded certain things like the shofar service and some of the Yisker videos, which went over very, very well. The music part was extremely challenging from what I'm hearing from our cantorial colleagues. Could you, Jeff, Adena, could you just speak to that? What are the challenges you had with the music? Adena, why don't you take it first? But I can't hear you.
How about now?
Go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
So our cantor worked with our accompanist to pre-record all of her pieces. So he had to let her know which pieces she needed to pre-record, and they coordinated that together. Then she would send him the file, and he then pre-recorded his vocals, and then he would get to the sanctuary and have the videographer video him lip syncing to his recording, so that the videographer would then put everything together. For a couple of pieces, we had a congregant play cello, so that included Kol Nidre and Avinu Malkeinu. And when I was speaking to this congregant, he expressed frustration that when he really would have loved to play off of the pianist in person and actually be able to respond to what was going on in the moment and have her be able to respond to how he was playing as well, which you cannot do with pre-recordings. So he basically received her recording, played his piece to the recording, and it felt very sterile to him. So there were definitely challenges around music this year.
Oh, yeah. Jeff, what about you? How did you handle the music thing?
We do not have a real live in-person cantor or cantorial soloist. As a matter of fact, when the congregation ended its relationship with its former cantor, I woke up in the middle of the night and I realized that because of COVID, there was no reason, neither was there be the possibility or opportunity to have a real cantor in place. We couldn't have hired one if we could have interviewed them. And so therefore, the world became, forgive me, my oyster. And so we wound up bringing in Neshama Karlbach from New York virtually. She sang for us. She pre-recorded some music, and it went over very, very well. And this is, by the way, a positive piece, if there is such a thing, that I'm sure we will get to, which is that COVID and the use of technology has put the final nail in the coffin of place-limited worship and experience. You can have people now on virtual staff as virtual programs from all over the world. And the circumstances of this are grievous and lethal. That being said, there are programmatic possibilities that we should have been considering, could have been considering, were considering, and have now become, well, it's making virtue out of a necessity.
Well, so yes, that's where I want to go with this, actually. But I wanted to get some background in too. So, Steve, do you want to comment on anything about the music? And then I want to just go back to one more question before we deal with the future. And Steve, do you have a sense of, because my sense of talking to colleagues around the country is because of the virtual high holidays, more people attended services than had in previous years. That's a generalization. I know in the congregation I worked with, they did some analytics. That was true. I'm very anxious to see, because I think it's a segue into what Jeff was talking about, where I really want to take this conversation. So do you have a sense of Temple Emanuel and Cherry Hill were more people involved with going to services, quote unquote, whatever that meant? Because some people could just hit the screen for 20 minutes and then go off in someplace, another congregation. A lot of people, congregations shopped because they just push a button, they go here, push a button, and they're there. So Steve, from your sense of Emmanuel, did you have a sense that more people, quote, attended?
Absolutely. We found this to be true even before we started planning for the High Holidays recordings. We were doing Torah studies and other adult education functions online with Zoom and other tools. And the attendance was actually going up versus where we were when we were doing it just in person. And the numbers that we got from the simulated live stream of the High Holiday services were very clear that we had probably twice as many people attending the services as we would have had if we had been in person and doing it live.
So this is really, I'm picking this up around the country. Mm-hmm. And forget the mega congregations who have resources that most of us don't have. But the question really that I want to raise with you all, and as we are trying to navigate this pandemic, there's a surge around the country and a third wave, but eventually we're going to move out of this. And I'm really, really anxious, because my personal feeling is, and to piggyback on a little bit of what Jeff was talking about, this is the beginning of a whole new environment, that the necessity of having everything in a building is gone. It's over with. And the intelligent congregation is going to understand this, is going to start working on exactly what happened, and try to figure out how that anything that happens in the building is going to have an electronic component. That the ritual committee meeting, the House and Grounds committee meeting, they're going to have a Zoom hookup or a phone hookup, because people are getting used to doing their temple business without having to get in the car and driving to the building. And I'm very interested to see, you as my colleagues who are working in the trenches, we're looking forward. As a result of the experience of the holidays in these last 8 months, Adena, what do you see the future of the marriage of electronics, education, and worship? Because I think it also has profound implications for our religious schools. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Adena. And then we're just going to go around the screen.
So actually, in preparation for today, I was thinking a lot about 4 years ago when my oldest son arrived, and we brought him home on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I had to go to other synagogues virtually in order to attend High Holy Day services, because my own shul wasn't live streaming yet. And I really pushed hard to get us to start live streaming, because if I couldn't access the High Holy Days because I was homebound, how many others were in the same position? And so we actually have been live streaming for the last, let's say, three and a half years. But this year was a whole new ball of wax. It was, what we used to do is just have the camera that we had to record B'nai Mitzvah services was hooked up to YouTube, and if you weren't on a microphone, you didn't get picked up, and if you weren't quite in the screen, you would go off camera. But now that everyone's used to Zoom, we really have to think differently about how we do all of this, especially as people are aging and not able to drive at night, or don't feel comfortable driving at all, as we have our college students that we're trying to re-engage who are not at home, people who are ill or in the hospital, and we have to really think differently about how we do what we do. I'm trying to think if we want to create smart rooms in our synagogue, so that we definitely need to up our technology game in the building, because we need a setup that will enable us to be present for the people who are in the room and be present for the people who aren't in the room. And so that's the greatest struggle I see going forward, is how do we do both of those things well? because I know how to speak to the camera on my computer really well, and I know how to speak from the beamer really well, but how do you mesh those things together so that both people feel that they're actually being included? Right now for religious school, we have learning in the lot, outdoor, socially distant, fully masked, in-person education. And then later in the morning, we have Zoom school. And is that going to be the wave of the future? And or at least for midweek older students for Hebrew school, given that kids live in all different townships and parents don't always have the ability to drive them to religious school, should we start thinking about a more virtual model for that so that it makes it more convenient for people to get their kids the learning that they need in the middle of a school week?
Jeff?
I think what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years is that we're going to discover that a previous generation's, edifice complex will start to evaporate. As younger people are much more accustomed to living virtually and beyond space and beyond place, we're going to see that ramification really blowing up in the contemporary synagogue. I'll give you an example. It's a small example. My cell phone number begins with the area code 404. Now, I haven't lived in 404, Atlanta, in quite some time. But when, almost 20 years ago, I got this phone, that's where I lived. That number has journeyed with me into all sorts of other area codes, but it remains my area code. Place is less important than it's ever been and will continue to be less important. That being said, I want to agree with Adena. The dexterity here that will be necessary is how do we navigate between the real, in-person, building-related stuff and that which is going to have to be virtual. And Adena is making a very important point here, which is that for younger families who might not be living near the synagogue, especially synagogues that are in second or third generation neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods, where Jews have moved beyond, this is a tremendous opportunity to reach people who are not in the neighborhood. And I'll go one step further. If we could create models whereby Adena, for example, is not only educating, quote unquote, her kids in her religious school, but also kids who are in Trenton, Northeast Philadelphia, who are in central New Jersey, and if other congregations were doing this, then we would have virtual schools. And it would potentially bring in any number of people who are unaffiliated, whose mishagas had been, I don't want to be part of a building. I mean, that's not really important to me. The issue, and by the way, the URJ, the Reform Movement, etc., could do this given certain realities. The question will be, how do you monetize this? How does this pay for itself? Because, Richard, you used a phrase moments ago. People are shopping online from one service to another. They're not shopping. They're not shopping to purchase. They're browsing. They're like the people who read the magazines in Barnes and Noble but don't buy. So how will institutions survive this? And I don't know. I'm just grateful that it's going to be Adena's problem, not mine.
Be careful what you say. So So be careful. Both of what you're saying is I'm trying to get some congregations when I talk to them to understand that on the board level, there now should be a vice president in charge of social media. And one of the hires for every congregation should be a staff member whose job only it is to deal with the technology, the advancement of technology, and the footprint, the social media footprint of the congregation. That should be a staff member, and there should be a lay committee. Steve, you're the technology person for your synagogue. This is a generalization based upon 48 years of experience. Most congregations, when they do the electronic, when they build the building or refit the building, they have one camera. One camera that has a wide shot on the Bema, and that if you happen to go, like Adena was talking, if you happen to go over there and say hello to Shirley, doesn't matter. If you were in charge, I'm going to make you in charge of congregational reconstruction and architecture. How does the contemporary congregation, knowing what my colleagues are talking about and seeing into the future, how do they begin to retrofit that building? Forget building a new building, that retrofit that building so that they can really maximize their electronic footprint? How much would it cost? Is it possible? What advice would you give a lay leadership?
It starts from rethinking the way we design the sanctuaries and the sanctuary space. We actually have buildings designed, and this is not unique to synagogues, but a lot of public buildings, meeting space is designed on the assumption that the audio and video equipment in the space needs to be protected from unauthorized hands getting on it or people walking out of the building with it. So it's typically in a cage of some sort, locked down in a closet somewhere, and that makes it completely inaccessible to people who want to do the kinds of productions that we're trying to do. So the first thing you have to do is redesign some of the space like the Christian churches have done. A lot of the Christian churches have built their sanctuary space very much like a theater environment where you have what they call the front of house production console, where there's a mixing panel, there are video switchers, and all of the inputs and outputs that you need to produce audio and video. One of the things that we've struggled with recently for live stream services is figuring out how to get the house audio into the Zoom or the vMix or whatever live stream platform we're using. And it took some real cable gymnastics, if you will, to get the audio from the mixing panel, which was locked in a cabinet in the cloakroom, and get that audio to be available to be fed into a video broadcast. That was like a major challenge for us. So the whole way that we put the buildings together, infrastructure-wise, synagogues are typical of a lot of nonprofits in terms of their technology. They're keeping older technology alive much longer than they should. And so we're trying to use laptop computers that are not really powerful enough to do video from the Bema. They have older cameras built into them with less resolution. People are expecting reasonably good resolution video. They're accustomed to it from the Zooms they're doing at home, and they're frustrated when they don't see it from our institutions.
So given that, there's so many questions, but before we start running out of time, and if you are a member of a congregation or a colleague and you're watching this or listening to this, I urge you, I beg you, please, in your own community, in your congregation, start getting together a task force to really begin to brainstorm and blue sky the future, because the future is going to be here before we know it. And my feeling is if a congregation decides to think it's going to go back to the way it was before March of 2020 and everything will be wonderful, they'll be out of business within 5 to 10 years. That this is the future. But I got to ask my colleagues this question, because you all know that this question gets asked of us all the time. All this is wonderful, the virtual. We've gone to Torah study on Zoom, and we've gone to services on Zoom, and we've gone to high holidays on live stream, and what about community? So many of our people, they just miss saying hello to Shirley and Morty and having a cup of coffee with them. And how do you begin to function a future where we don't sacrifice that human interaction? Not that it's ever going to be, because we'll eventually have this hybrid. But how do you begin to deal with this as people, I think, now are going to start to wrestle with, yeah, this is fine. It's wonderful. I'm getting tired of it already. There's a Zoom fatigue setting in. How do you begin to deal with that? I'll start. Go ahead, Jeff, start, and I'll go to Adena.
I was worried about this for quite some time. And I actually thought that this was destroying community. And I think that people do long for the human touch. And there certainly is Zoom fatigue, especially among our religious school kids and their parents. There's a Yiddish term that someone invented, "Ausgesucht." We are just completely drowning. I think this has led to one of the most profound transformations of the idea of community in human history, which is that every religion begins with a kind of technology of reading, from clay tablets to the scroll, to the handwritten book, to the printing press, and now we are in an entirely new era. So from clay tablets to the scroll, to the handwritten book, to the printing press, now to the internet. So every technology brings with it a new way of reading and understanding, but every technology also brings within it a new sense of what community means. This is redefining community. And if you've participated in a Zoom Shiva, a Zoom wedding or whatever, you can see it. I'm going to be dragged kicking and screaming into this brave new world because I still long to be with people. But there is a new kind of being that is now in the process of being birthed.
Adena?
I've been thinking for a while now about how do we get out of the building more, but I think I was thinking more along the lines of going to other indoor spaces, and really what COVID has done for us is think more creatively about outdoor spaces especially, and thinking of the commons as a metaphor. Is there a commons that we can create outside of the building where people feel like they're welcome and it's lowering the barrier to entry? I've been thinking about senior centers and local libraries and people's backyards and parks. And I think that those elements of the future of community, I think, will strengthen us. That people are looking for ways to integrate the lives that they lead every day with their Jewish life, and if we show them how they can live Jewishly outside of a building, I think that'll only make us stronger going forward. But I do wish at this moment in time that I was down south as we're preparing for a cold and isolating winter. But even then, I'm wondering, especially for our youth, if we can do more things outside. I'm even thinking like a snowball fight this winter, if that's in the cards weather-wise.
No, I know a lot of congregations are going outside. I know some congregations doing outdoor bar bat mitzvahs. As long as the weather holds up, they're putting up tents. This is a very creative. I mean, this is giving rise to a tremendous amount of creativity. The creativity that was exhibited by colleagues and congregations and cantors for the high holidays has been it's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And none of us had this class at HUC or JTS or any seminary. And I hope that they put one in, by the way. Almost, we're starting to run out of time and I want to be respectful, but I got to ask you this question to my colleagues. Does what we're living in give the implication that we now have to redefine what it means to be a member of a synagogue? I know that some congregations, Stephen S. Wise in LA, have started something that really, we're just going to open up membership to anybody in the world. And, if you're in Des Moines or you really liked our services and you came to us for the holidays, and you want to support us and you like the rabbi, you loved her sermon, for a nominal donation, we'll make you a member, an associate or adjunct or long distance, whatever, come up with the appropriate Hebrew term, member of our congregation. Does this are we beginning in an era of global congregations where the concept of membership is not tied to a geographic area? I really like your opinion on that. Adena?
Yes, actually, this is something we've already started talking about this year. We were already looking at different membership models because we're fearing that what we're doing currently isn't attracting my peers. But especially given COVID, we were starting to wonder about what would it look like to subscribe to Beth Chaim, or, and so for a subscription fee from anywhere, you can participate in this class or, unlimited worship connectivity or something else along those lines. So we actually are trying to think about that. Also, as we get a lot more folks who end up migrating to places like Florida or the Carolinas or Arizona where it's warmer, or their kids move away, or it's the kids who grew up in the shul who then move to New York or Chicago or Boston, we want them to feel as if they're still part of our community. So how do we actually formalize that relationship and said, okay, great, you were a dues paying member in the classical sense for so many years, or you were in a family that did that. How do we formalize your continued relationship with Beth Chaim going forward, even if you might not live in the backyard anymore?
Jeff?
The problem for me, as much as I agree with what Adena is saying, is that the whole notion of subscription moves the synagogue experience into a theatrical experience, into a cultural experience, even into a sports experience, and further chips away at the idea of a community because you lose the sense of communal obligation. That being said, I think Adena is on the money, so to speak, when she talks about this. But I also think that it's going to lead to the NPRization of synagogues. We're going to be doing fund drives many times a year. And the only real problem will be this. It's not like this revolution is going to happen one day and the next day everything is going to be different. There's going to be a significant time lag. You're going to have people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s who will say, I have been a dues-paying member of this congregation, and now you're telling me that someone in Dubuque can just take advantage of what we do for a fraction of what I am paying, and I've been paying a building fund. I do not blame them, and I do not judge them. This is not an easy social change, and this is a sea change in the way that synagogues have been doing business. That being said, it will lead to increased fund drives. It will lead to foundation funding. It could lead to fewer bigger givers giving bigger sums. But my mathematical issue here, and not having an MBA, not an NBA, not having an MBA. I don't know how you do a budget based on this. I just don't know.
We are in the beginning of I think all of us are saying this revolution. Steve, as I want to take you off your technological kippah and put your dues-paying member kippah of Temple Emanuel on, an active member of a congregation. As a layperson, how do you react to this? This conversation? Are you comfortable with your synagogue emerging and evolving into this, or really are you frightened that it's going to take away what was or what is the strength of the community of Temple Emanuel of Cherry Hill? And you're not hearing it. We're not hearing you.
I think one of the challenges that the synagogues are seeing and have been seeing for years is the erosion of the in-person experience. People have so many opportunities to do Jewish things and things with a Jewish flavor that becoming a paying member of a synagogue is sometimes less important to them. And they're finding alternative ways to fill that void. And if the synagogues don't adapt, they're going to find themselves with a lot of big empty buildings. And I think one of the ways for synagogues to look at this is if you have a more global congregation through the use of technology, you have an opportunity to maybe change the way you collect money to support the organization by having less of a physical infrastructure. And that's, a big change for most people. Most people are accustomed to the synagogue being a building that you go to. And I think that over the next few years, it's going to be a hybrid transitioning to more of a virtual experience, because when this is all over, and I pray and I hope and I believe that the pandemic is going to be over someday, that people will go back to in-person experiences because we all crave that. But the reality is there are people who can't be there for a variety of reasons, and they don't want to be left out. And we can't ever go back to just having services without providing a live stream component for people. It's going to be part of what we do going forward, and that may mean reconfiguring the physical structure of the building to a smaller size, and that's okay. And you have lower costs, but you also have costs that you transfer to the technology side.
Yeah, it also may, and as Rabbi Person in the podcast that we aired a couple of weeks ago, this also may open up the diminution of rabbinic and cantorial staff for exactly what you're talking about. This is a very, very interesting, and I want to thank you for just starting this conversation. The conversation is going to have to continue for a long time here, and to me, it's a very exciting conversation and filled with possible great creative potential. So Steve Lubetkin, our producer, but also the manager and managing partner of Lubetkin Media Companies, our colleagues, Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, Temple Israel, West Palm Beach, and Rabbi Adena Blum, Beth, Chaim in Princeton Junction, West Windsor, New Jersey. Thank you very much, really, for beginning this conversation. To those of you who are listening, I hope in your particular congregation or organization, you will take some of this and continue the conversation, because it's a conversation that has to be had in every single one of our congregations. So to all of you, thank you. And to all of you who are listening or watching, thank you again for participating and joining us in today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV and podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember that this show is now available as a TV broadcast on the Roku streaming service. Just visit bit.ly/JSAROKU, that's JSA Roku, to add it to your Roku box. I have no idea what I just said, but I think some of you under the age of 50 probably understand what I just said. And again, we welcome, Dina's shaking her head, and Salkin is looking at me as like, what the heck are you talking about? Anyway, we welcome your comments and suggestions to us. You can email me at Rabbi Address at JewishSacredAging.com. And again, we invite you to visit our Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. And I want to thank all of you who have begun to make some donations, tax-free donations, to further our work. And you can do that by going to the homepage and clicking on the donate button. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And again, we thank one of our panelists today and friend, Steve Lubetkin. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I look forward to greeting you again on our next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. To all of you, shalom, take care, stay safe, stay healthy.